Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's good to be together again to learn for our second session of Theology After the Holocaust. We had a very, very powerful first meeting last month. We didn't get to too much theology after the Holocaust, but we had a really important conversation about where we are right now and how we might even feel some powerful resonances with especially anti-Semitism that we see in the world today, and how it might affect the way that we think about theology and the Holocaust. We're going to try, I'm hopeful today that we're going to look at two different thinkers' ideas on how we can think of God after the Holocaust. We did look last time at a very brief section from Neil Gaiman's book called Sacred Fragments. I'm going to be handing out, not now, but I will be handing out the same handout that I gave last time. I don't expect that anybody brought it from last time, so I'm just going to give it again, and I'll put it into the chat as well. But Neil Gaiman pretty much lays out for us what are the stakes, what is the question that we're really dealing with when we're talking about theology after the Holocaust, that there's a myth that's been broken of an all-powerful, all-good God, right? If God is all-powerful, if God is all-good, how could the Holocaust have happened? I mentioned that question is not unique necessarily to the Holocaust, right? It's a question called theodicy, which is, we said specifically, when bad things happen to good people, right? We talked about Rabbi Kushner's book. And Jewish thinkers in particular take this question and look at it differently after the Holocaust because of the scale and scope and the sheer magnitude of what the Holocaust was, not just that it was one person or 100 people or 1,000 people doing terrible things to the Jewish people, but it was an entire system that was used to try to fully, and when we talk about what was the hope, what was Hitler's hope during the Holocaust, to fully wipe out the Jewish people if he could, and that he got as close as he did, taking out 6 million Jewish people, which was about a third of the Jewish population in the world at the time. Jewish thinkers think of this question differently, for the most part, than why does a child get cancer, or how is it that a pogrom could happen? How could 1,000 people be killed? Right? The question is different when dealing with the Holocaust for the most part. We'll look at later in the semester. We'll look at Eliezer Berkovitz, who does see the Holocaust as a wider scope of theodicy. But today we're going to be dealing with we're going to be looking at two thinkers: Richard Rubenstein first, and then David Weiss Halivni, who I've brought together for a reason, that they look at the question in similar ways, but we're going to talk about sort of comparing and contrasting them throughout the session.
Richard Rubenstein was a rabbi, or a scholar.
A scholar. I don't believe that he was a rabbi. Scholar. Yeah. And we will look at this together. All on one screen. And I'm going to share it on screen for the folks who are on Zoom. So before we read this, I just want to mention I'm very grateful. The Hadar Institute, which is a Jewish Institute of Learning in New York, has just had some lectures basically on this exact topic, which is faith after the Holocaust. And they have posted their their lectures as well as the source sheets from that. And so I was able to pull from their source sheet. So I put, with thanks to Rabbi Shai Held, from the Hadar lectures that he was leading this in these last couple of months. So Richard Rubenstein is going to be talking about the idea of God is dead. God is dead, right? Which is a very stark way to put it. Let's read and then we'll talk. Can somebody volunteer to read for us? Thanks, Sue.
No man can really say that God is dead. How can we know that? Nevertheless, I am compelled to say that we live in a time of the death of God. This is more a statement about man and his culture than about God. When I say we live in the time of the death of God, I mean that the thread uniting God and man, heaven and earth, has been broken. We stand in cold, silent, unfeeling cosmos, unaided by any purposeful power beyond our own resources. After Auschwitz, what else can a Jew say about God? I believe the greatest single challenge to modern Judaism arises out of the question of God and the death camps. How can Jews believe in an omnipotent, beneficent God after Auschwitz? Traditional Jewish theology maintains that God is the ultimate omnipotent actor in the historical drama. It has interpreted every major catastrophe in Jewish history as God's punishment of a sinful Israel. I fail to see how this position can be maintained without regarding Hitler and the SS as instruments of God's will. To see any purpose in the death camps, the traditional believer is forced to regard the most demonic, anti-human explosion in all history as a meaningful expression of God's purposes. The idea is simply too obscene for me to accept. I believe there is a conception of God which remains meaningful after the death of God who acts in history. It is a very cold conception of God with deep roots in both Western and Oriental mysticism. According to this conception, God is spoken of as the holy nothing. When God is thus designated, he is conceived as the ground and source of all existence. To speak of God as the holy nothingness is not to suggest that he is void. On the contrary, he is indivisible, plenum, so rich that all existence derives from his very essence. God has nothing, is not absence of being, but superfluity of being.
Thank you. Some words we don't see every day in there. Yeah. Right. God as nothing is not absence of being, but superfluity of being.
This is not a second grade reader.
This is not a second grade reader.
What's the word? What does that mean?
Yeah, I don't know what the word plenum means.
Plenum is like an air duct of yeah. Think of the ducts that carry air conditioning and heating through your house. They're plenums.
Okay, so it's like I was thinking of it as a sort of foundation, as a
Like a tunnel.
right. Okay. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. So it's sort of, there's an idea, right? A nothingness idea, perhaps, through which everything comes. Yeah. Elliot, I saw a quizzical look on your face.
I don't really understand what he's saying.
Great. Yeah. No, we'll have to pick through it. So let's.
Oh, okay.
Because I don't know if I do either. So
God
let's.
is good, God is bad. God did good things, God did bad things. Which God is where?
Okay, so God is good, God is bad. Where does he come out on this, or does he?
So is he saying that after the Holocaust and reflection, there's a new spirituality and a new belief in God, that prior to that things were kind of orderly and now there's no order? I mean, even before I started reading that and I saw this, I said, that's what kind of it reminded me of, that there's just a new chapter and a new look at what the meaning of God, and holding on to that, or is it spirituality? Does it become more subjective than objective to a whole community?
Great. Can you say more about what you mean by objective to a whole community?
Well, just reflecting on some literature that I've read in the past, that families that perhaps survived the Holocaust and moved, let's say, to the United States, or they moved to Israel, or they became more secular in their beliefs. They didn't identify with Judaism at all. They changed their names to be more anglicized. And so that's a personal view. Then looking at the broader community, meaning that after World War II, were there more Jewish people who were more involved with social, in the United States, more social justice, that prayer and ritual became more user-friendly and not as rigid. I guess that's how
Right, and not a reminder, but just to say that he's also writing, I actually don't know the exact, oh, yes, of course, they're right here, 1966 and 1992. So especially in the 60s, there is a God is, well, first of all, it's the 1960s. Second of all, it's there's a movement in theology in general, not just Jewish theology, a God is dead type movement, which of course also has some Christian resonances. And Neil Gaiman actually writes about this in Sacred Fragments, though I didn't bring that. Right, God is dead, and so we need to think about a new myth or a new way of thinking about God. Yes.
Here's what that word means: superfluidity.
Oh, superfluity. Yeah. Superfluousness.
An unnecessary or excessive large amount or number of something.
Yeah.
Right. It's
an unnecessary thing.
Or here maybe more a lot of it.
The state of being superfluous.
Meaning God is not nothing, God is everything in a way. So we'll come back to that in a minute.
Unnecessarily more than ever.
Yeah, Steve,
well, you said
go ahead. And I hear folks online too, and so we'll go Steve, and then if someone online has something, and then to Scott.
I do remember in the 80s, I think there was a headline in Time magazine that God is dead.
Yes, it was.
So I remember that. But I also think that there were many of the ultra-Orthodox who believed that the Holocaust was something because Jewish people had sinned. And so whether it was a movement. But I also come back to the idea that the Pirkei Avot statement is pray as everything depends on God,
right?
But act as everything depends on you. So I think the question about God is really something else, because without God, people might behave in sort of animalistic ways. And I think that the idea that there is a God puts some order and asks people to say morally, be moral. I think there's people, what Lino talked about this morning, trying to help people. I think that is acting in, whether you believe in God or not, in a divine purpose. And I think, Tikkun Olam is the idea of making the world a better place. And I mean, you mentioned, we're supposed to help strangers. I don't know whether all people decide to help strangers, but some of our DNA is to help people. I think it's something really hard to justify. Every Friday night we sing Mi Kamocha, and we, talk about the opening of the Red Sea, the Sea of Reeds, and we don't have any people present who experience that miracle that can convey to us that, there is a God. And so there's a lot of doubt, especially in the world today. I mean,
isn't the question, what kind of a God is this? Because if you follow if I'm following you, and I'm not sure I am,
no one follows me. I follow Barbara.
Well, that's what I was going to say. If I'm trying to follow what you're saying, then if everybody has something godlike in them, does that mean Hitler was godlike?
Well, so I think that's where the disruption is, right? That's really where the question is, because perhaps we could find throughout history a way to rationalize and to understand God through history, even during the bad times, even during, we could say, and we'll look at thinkers who talk about, so maybe when the first temple was destroyed, the Israelites were sinful, and so that was punishment from God. Maybe even during the second temple, this was punishment from God. We cannot continue to be true. Sorry, I'm having trouble putting this into words. The Holocaust so shakes our faith in any of that because it was the wholesale slaughter of men, women, and children in such a brutal and incomprehensible way that we must have a new model. And yes, there are ultra orthodox thinkers who say, oh, we weren't studying enough Torah, right? And that's not something that I could, as a rabbi, ever imagine putting forward. I know that I mentioned Yitz Greenberg's, and I have it here as well, his statement that says, no statement, theological or otherwise, should be made that would not be credible in the presence of burning children, right? That we have to be able to understand God if we're going to continue to live our Jewish lives. We have to understand God in a way that both recognizes that the Holocaust happened and gives us a way forward to live our lives, right? And so it's right, that is the challenge. So for Rubenstein, or Rubenstein, I never know, right? He says, well, this whole model, this whole idea of an omnipotent, right, an all-powerful and a good God, just that has to go away. Notice he's specifically not saying God is dead, but we're living in a time of the death of God, which we probably won't fully pull apart, but he says, right, that it's more a statement about man and his culture than about God, which I think is interesting, and maybe we will say more about that. I want to go, if there was anybody online who wanted to say something. Yeah, Carol, please.
I was always taken by the thought that each person has a good and bad inclination, Yetzer Ra and Yetzer Tov, and that understanding God helps you to choose Yetzer Tov in all kinds of situations. Relative to the Holocaust, of course, I've thought about it a whole lot, and I've come to the conclusion rather recently that it's sort of following a cult personality that completely ran amok. So I've tried to understand that the Yetzer Ra took over all of these people, and it's not that God is bad, it's that people have this inclination within them and they can choose which way to go. And our task as Jews and as parents is to teach Yetzer Tov. That's my take on it at the moment. It could change tomorrow or even in an hour.
Thank you, Carol. Yeah, the idea of free will, right? That we get to decide, and Judaism generally really falls down on the side of free will, right? Without it, we would have no chance to do tshuva, to do repentance, right? And choose differently another time. And when it comes to the Holocaust, there is a question of how could it possibly be that so many people lost their humanity, lost their good inclination, and followed only, right, the Yetzer Hara, the cult personality, the bad inclination. And where is God in any of that, right? Where is God in any of that? Hold on, I think Scott had something, yeah.
Just to locate the idea of God is dead and how that first came about. It became a very strong philosophical current at the time of around the end of World War I. And the author, Dostoevsky, the Russian philosophical author, actually, that was his statement from his book in and around the early 20th century.
Wow.
And And then with the coming of the Holocaust, it was even more apparent that we were in new times and that you had to address that fact into any kind of forward-thinking philosophical understanding.
Thank you, Scott.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's amazing.
Really powerful.
I read all that whole book. I know.
Let's go to Merle and Deborah and then to Andy.
So I just wanted to comment a little on that phrase of the death of God. Our God is dead. And I think about it more as, when there's a rift and someone might say, well, they're dead to me now. And so maybe on a larger scale with humanity or culture, God became dead. God still existed, just like, if the tree falls in the wood, doesn't make noise. God is still there, but God is not recognized in the minds of the people. But that's just a comment there. And then I had a comment about God as nothing, or the superfluity of being, that if all is one, there is no individual being. So that's how I read that there. Do you have a comment? No, okay, that was it.
I just
Oh,
it's true. I mean, in Judaism we have brogus, right? We have brogus, ani brogus, I'm brogus, meaning that person is dead to me. So we do, unfortunately, within our culture, have an accepted behavior of cutting people off. And I've to myself, are we sort of armoring ourselves against other? Do we armor ourselves against God? It doesn't mean we don't accept him, but we don't want to have a relationship with him at this time, or he no longer brings me beneficence. Those are my thoughts.
Right. The only way that we can meaningfully move forward is by shutting out, to some extent, our relationship with God. That's what I'm hearing in what you're saying, Deborah.
And, for pure transparency, I'm an Israeli. And so I think as a nation, when we're living there, you hear these conversations all the time, right? Unless you're an ultra-Orthodox, how do I weigh the scales of what I live and what I see around me on a daily basis, or be completely like a horse with blinkers and just not see anything other than my one belief?
Tunnel vision.
Right. Thank you. Well, we're glad that you're with us this morning to share your thoughts. Thank you. Andy.
Well, the more people talk and the more I listen and read here, the more ideas come to my head, so it may take a while. I'd like to start with one of the most famous biblical concepts. God created us in his image. And there are a lot of interpretations of that. I like to think not that God has two arms and two legs and whatever else, but that we have the ability to tell good from evil. We have the ability to create original ideas. And perhaps that'll do. We can tell good from evil, and we alone among creatures with God could create things. We can have emotions. We can love. We can hate. I mean, you might think that your pet dog can love, but most of the animal world operates by instinct, and I think a dog's love is in fact instinct, to be concerned about his caregiver. All right. Why were we created? I've always felt that God was alone. He created us to be a companion for him. The angels weren't good enough. They would do whatever he said. He needed somebody he could sit down and play bridge with. All right. And we didn't work out the way he wanted. Too many of us turned to evil. He tried several times to correct us. He tried at Sodom and Gomorrah. He tried Noah and the ark. And I think he finally said, they can not only tell evil, they can tell good. And if I leave them alone, the world will someday be what I wanted it to be. And at that point, he disengaged. And he didn't die. He just sat back and watched it happen. He no longer micromanaged the world. the concept of Israel's evil causing this. I think sometimes we are too egocentric. Quick question. How many people died in World War II? Anybody know?
Millions.
300 million.
How many Jews died in World War II? We know that number.
Right.
50 million people, plus or minus, died in World War II.
Exactly.
6
And we can
million.
only count for 6.
What?
Yes, about the
Did
6
you include
million.
the 6? I don't know.
Yes.
That includes the 6, yes.
Right.
Although at this point, the number is becoming so large that 6 becomes irrelevant.
Mhm.
You know, whether it was 56 or 44, 50 million people died in World War II. Were most of them Jews? Were they the largest number? No, Russians were the largest number, non-Jewish Russians. Do we ever talk about them?
Those
I mean-
are soldiers.
And that includes, yeah,
Those
not
are
that's
not
soldiers.
innocent
It includes
kids.
German soldiers too.
No, those are not innocent kids, Andy.
No, they're not, but 50 million of them died, and dead is dead whether you were innocent or not.
Sure,
Okay?
but that's different than what we're talking
Then
about.
we ought to deduct the Jewish soldiers from the 6 million.
But you could ask, why did 50 million people die in the
Right,
Second World War?
and why are we so concerned? I mean, are we really doing Tikkun Olam, trying to improve the whole world, or are we just trying to improve our lot? And I worry about that.
So
Why are
Andy,
we
I'm curious where that fits in with the theology.
Well, the
piece
question
that-
about whether God is dead comes back to my first point, that God just withdrew himself. He stopped micromanaging the world. Man was not what he expected it to be, but he gave us in his image, and we could be what he expected us to be. And he is awaiting for the day that we make the world what he wanted it to be.
Mhm.
That's when the Messiah will come.
That's not a God I want to be involved
It's not
with.
realistic.
Well, you may not have a choice. It's, you
Well,
know,
of course we have a choice.
So
so
I
you
think
can believe
To
that God is
believe or
dead.
not.
right.
And
So
you know what? When we finally turn the world into the paradise on earth that he expected us to be all along, that's when the Messiah will come.
Well, that's-
Providing you believe that God created the earth.
Yeah, well, yes, in one way or another.
Can you
The
say
fact
more
that
about
we-
that, Ellie?
The fact that we know the mechanics of how it happened through science doesn't make it less of a miracle.
Ellie, can you say more about what you mean by needing to believe that it was God who created in order
I think
to?
that for me has always been a bit of a fairy tale. I don't know how the earth was created. I don't know how human beings were created because we don't know that. Maybe someday science will find that out. But I don't believe, if we believe as Jews that we're here to live a good, clean, giving life, then what kind of a God takes 6 million
He didn't.
in a systematic way?
He didn't take them. He just became uninvolved.
Yeah,
6,000
well,
years
what's
ago.
the difference, Andy?
So hold on. Okay, so this is no, it's good. It's good conversation, and it's upsetting, right? Because what we're
Yes.
talking about is how could God let this happen? Right, Andy, you're saying, well, God stepped back, and that's a decision that God made, and my understanding of theology means that I'm talking as you, saying that I have to now figure out what that means to live in a world and to practice a Judaism where God might have fully stepped back. And we're going to actually see that in the next piece that we look at.
Mhm.
Ellie, what I hear you saying is, that doesn't work for me. That doesn't work for me, right? And so I think that part of, if we take a step back, is figuring out, right? Not all of these thinkers agree with each other, just as we're not all going to agree with each other as to what kind of theology we take forward from this. So Ellie, I hope that we'll find somebody throughout this semester who you click with, whose theology you can say, all right, that is a God that I can understand and maybe believe in after the Holocaust.
So you want you want to know what level of evil is so great that God will again become involved and micromanage the world. Because otherwise we step back to lesser evils, many of which were discussed here.
But
how could God have let that happen?
But
and I'm sure people asked that question at the time.
But And there are some people who believe, right? There's a theological idea that God has never stepped out of having some sort of impact on the world, right? And so we have to make room for thinking about that too, right? For some people, the full stepping back either before the Holocaust, because Andy, what I'm hearing is your conception of God has God pulling back actually before the Holocaust, and so of course the Holocaust can happen because
and worse than that can happen if he's not engaged.
And for people who believe that God has some sort of impact on our daily lives, now we have to reconcile all of that. So I'm gonna stop this conversation for now. And I wanna just say a few more words about Richard Rubenstein, and then I want to look at one more idea for today and see how we might sort of do some comparing and contrasting. So I want to say that even though Richard Rubenstein says that we live in a time of the death of God, he is not saying that God does not exist, right? He takes actually what is a very Kabbalistic spiritual idea of what God is. It's this last paragraph here, right? God is spoken of as the holy nothing. God is sometimes spoken of as ayin, that like a nothingness, and at the same time Ein Sof, infinitude, right? That there's a nothingness, and that there's also an infinitude of God, right? So rich that all existence derives from God's very essence. God as nothing is not absence of being, but superfluity of being. Hold on one second, Scott. When we talk about the way I've been thinking about this is sometimes we translate Adonai or talk about God as source of life, right? That there's this sort of spiritual force idea maybe that we can think of God, not so much, right, as a God who pulls the strings with anything that happens in the world, but as, I don't know, I think about actually what Merle was saying, with God as a oneness, an infinitude that also has sort of roots in holy nothingness, right, which is also Oriental mysticism as well, as he talks about here. Scott.
Yeah, I was going to say the notion of tikkun olam comes from the Kabbalistic notion of tikkun, which has to do with the fact that the perfection of existence was partly constructed of vessels of light, which were then broken, and that's how evil entered into the world. And so that's one way of positioning oneself with this greater scheme of is God dead? The notion of that becomes alive through that philosophy.
Beautiful, and in that myth in particular, we become partners with God in collecting those vessels of light that are here on earth. Yeah, it's a powerful. Yeah,
it helps me.
Good. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, Ted.
I just keep going back to the first sentence of the last paragraph. I believe there's a conception of God which remains meaningful after the death of God who acts in history. So it's like if somebody, even if a human being dies, they're what they've contributed otherwise survives, right? So just because somebody dies, it doesn't mean that their ideas and their impact has died, you would hope. So if God is not any longer like here and now, his ideas or her ideas, whatever we believe, the being's ideas continue on.
Beautiful.
And his contributions are in fact because the person who passed away was created in God's image, and that's why he was able to contribute.
I don't believe that for 1 minute.
It's a beautiful metaphor.
Sorry.
It's a beautiful metaphor, and actually one more thing that I wanted to say about his thinking here is that he's not saying that we then abandon Judaism and we abandon tradition and Torah and everything that we, right? I think this is a beautiful way of thinking about it, that there have been contributions, right? There's so much zichrono livracha, may a person's memory be a blessing. And so we perpetuate that by continuing Judaism, by right? Richard Rubenstein isn't saying it's all over now, but he's actually saying, and he says this in his other writings, that we can find meaning during this time, particularly by being in community, by studying our rich texts, by even, actually, I don't know what he says specifically about prayer, but that prayer can still be meaningful even in a time of the death of God. Ted, thanks for bringing that sort of way of thinking in here.
Well, tradition and good works and good intentions are universal, and they can be passed on. And that's good. And prayer, if you believe in it, and the individual having the right to believe in what they want to believe in, I can go with that.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't go with this sort of concept of a God who I can't get beyond the Holocaust. I can't. And the kids. And I can't get beyond the kids in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
No good God would make kids die.
So you think God is dead?
What?
So you think God is dead?
No, I don't know.
I don't
You-
think
you
it's
don't know.
God. I
Okay.
don't think it's God. I think it's the individual person. We
Yes.
have people who are mean in this world,
Yes.
and we
Yes.
have people who are good in this world.
Right.
And it's
Absolutely.
part of their being. It's everyone has control of what they do in life. I don't think anyone alters that. I think it's what's in your heart and what you're made of that makes this world good and what makes this world bad. And it's ideologies. That's how I
Right.
I think like even people though, like in history, like you think about Schindler, like he was an alcoholic and a womanizer, right? But like people are complicated. Look what he did, right? Like he was a scumbag. Let's call it what it is. Like
But
he was
again, he
right?
also said, I wish I could have done more.
Well, he wanted to save more people with the
Right.
money that he squandered and drank with and everything else. But if he wasn't that person, he wouldn't have been able to do what he did.
Who are you
Right?
talking about? I'm
He was
sorry.
a
Schindler, right? Like he's as complicated, I think, as it gets, right?
Yeah. So fabulous. So I think that next time we're going to look at Eliezer Berkovitz, who's going to speak about this as well. This idea of, well, where let's not turn our attention to where isn't God, but where can we find God, right? Where can we find God even during the really, really painful, terrible moments, even during the Holocaust? So that will be next time.
You have an answer next time?
And next time all will be revealed, and
I'll be
and
here.
right, we've just been stringing you along. We have the answer next time. So I do want to look at one other brief.
I think I know the answer to everything.
Marcia had a comment.
Oh yeah, please, Marcia. I apologize. I haven't been seeing everything. Please, Marcia.
I'm sorry if this was already discussed. I wasn't able to tune in the beginning, so if this isn't appropriate, we can skip over it. Basically, it's two questions. One is, can you be a Jew and not believe in God, or are you then an atheist? And the other question is, what is one's definition of a God?
Excellent. Those are great questions, Marcia. And we haven't really tackled them yet.
Okay.
Excuse me. The short answer for now is that in terms of not believing in God, it does not take someone out of the definition of being a Jewish person. And there are many, many, many Jewish people who would say, I don't believe in God, or I'm not sure I believe in God. And I think that to the second question, I think that that's exactly what we're trying to figure out. I think that for a lot of people, the notion of a biblical God in particular, the God of the Torah, who can become zealous and angry and has and chooses a people and all of the things that that can make our understanding of God difficult. For all of that, there are lots and lots of other ways to, as Neil Gilman puts it, recover our theology and understand God in ways that actually do work for us. And for some, it's going to be following Richard Rubenstein and saying, yeah, I'm not sure exactly how to understand the stories of the Torah, but I can think of God as a source of life, as a nothingness and infinitude at the same time. And I can continue with that. We'll look now at David Weiss Halivni, who's going to have a different way of thinking about God. And I'm hoping, Marcia and everyone, that we might be able to answer that question for ourselves. What is it that we're talking about when we talk about God by the end of the semester? That would be aspirational. That would be great. So I'm putting it in the chat, but I'm also going to open it.
Can I just, while you're doing that, ask something?
Sure.
I didn't realize this was more than a one-shot deal. So what is the semester consist of?
Sure. Yeah, no, it's just two more lifelong learning sessions on January 7th and January 21st at the same time. 11:15 to 12:30. So this is David Weiss Halivni. He is a Holocaust survivor who later moved to Israel and actually just passed away. He was a Talmud scholar as well. He passed away in June of 2022. So wherever I took this from, which was the New Jewish Canon, was recently published, but he passed away since it was published. He is going to be talking here about a prayer from the Rosh Hashanah Amidah, where we ask God to reign over all the world in God's full glory, right? So to sort of take the reins. So that's the background here, but we don't really need the background. We want to pull out this piece that he's going to explain for us. In it, he's going to put aside a theology that is out there, a Jewish theology that's out there that says that God was hiding God's face during the Holocaust, and we'll talk about that more. He is going to understand it differently. So let's jump into it, and then we'll discuss. Scott, would you like to read?
To understand the full meaning of this prayer, you must first reflect deeply on the question that grounds all Holocaust theology. Do we attribute the Shoah to sin? Lest there be any doubt about my own response to this question, I will state my conclusions at the outset. It is written in the Torah, a second time in the prophets, a third time in the writings, and a fourth time in the words of our sages, that the Shoah was not the consequence of sin. I sympathize with those who claim that in order for a person to achieve responsibility for his actions, he must first be fully free without any obstacles and external influences. To be sure, the knowledge of good and evil itself influences a person to choose the good, but when he chooses evil, he must, in order to merit the punishment, have committed evil fully out of free choice, without any external intervention. Any kinds of intervention, even from God, reduces a person's responsibility for his actions. It is possible, therefore, that God will remain aloof. In order not to diminish a person's freedom to act, and thereby diminish his responsibility, God may stand apart, facing utter evil without intervening and without responding. Something like this happened in the time of the Shoah. God did not intervene and did not respond, but stood apart. Intentionally, I have not made any use of the concept of the hiding of God's face, Hester Panim, that is so prevalent in the literature of Holocaust theology. According to this concept, God hid his face during the time of the Shoah and allowed whatever happened to happen. I reject this notion because, as indicated in Deuteronomy, the hiding of God's face arises as a consequence of sin. This meaning appears explicitly in Isaiah. Your sins have made him turn his face away and refuse to hear you. If we believe that the hiding of God's face prevailed during the Shoah, then it would be as if we attributed the Shoah to sin, which is the very notion that we have rejected. God, as it were, restrained himself from taking part in history and gave humanity an opportunity to display its capacities for good or for evil. It is our misfortune that in the time of the Shoah, humanity displayed its capacities for unprecedented evil.
Thank you, Scott. So we'll pause there. I think that he's putting here some words on paper that we've danced around a little bit on our own, right? That is that the Shoah, the Holocaust, was a consequence of free will, right? That it is not, and he's unequivocal about saying, don't even try to go to a place where you could pin, right, the sins of the Israelite people or individuals, right, that the Holocaust is a consequence of sin. And he says specifically, and I want to work through this just for another moment. He says, right, that this idea of hester panim, the hiding of God's face, that's prevalent throughout Holocaust theology, he rejects because, and I'll tell you the source in the Torah where this idea comes from. It says in Deuteronomy, when they go astray, right, when the Israelite people go astray, my anger will flare up against them and I will hide my face. So the idea of, right, God hiding God's face, God stepping back from humanity, was a powerful notion for Jewish theologians to say, well, right, God was hiding God's face, as God says in the Torah that God might do. But David Weiss Halivni wants to be very exacting about this. He says, look at the whole verse here. The reason that God is hiding God's face in the verse, right, the reason that God turns away is because the Israelites have sinned. I cannot legitimately say that God is hiding God's face, because in order to say that, I would be forced to say that the Israelites sinned, and I can't go there. And as he says, the Shoah was not the consequence of sin, and even from other writings that we won't necessarily get into because it's not part of this, but right, that it was, there's no way that the Holocaust was as a consequence of sin. Initial reactions, thoughts, questions to this
comes back to a
section.
quote you gave very early by some other philosopher that said, and I don't remember the exact words, but no philosophy on the Holocaust can be valid if it can't stand in the face of burning children.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. That's sort of where he's going with this. Absolutely, right.
And I'll come back to a statement of mine about our being egotistical. 50 million people died in World War II. Does that mean that 50 million people in the world were sinful?
Right.
Were what?
Sinful.
No, they were.
No, of course not.
Victims.
Right. So
the nature of human interaction in this regard is always it's the innocent and the victim that become the victims, not the sinful. If it was sinful.
Right.
So here's a really bizarre notion.
Great.
Is the sin more that there were people in influential positions that saw what was going on and did nothing, including those American Jewish people who went to Congress and said, do something. And at the time, nothing was being done. And there was information that said we needed to be more aggressive. So are the people who laid back sinful because they did nothing to try to stop it?
A sin of omission.
Right. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think you might say?
Well, I think they were sinful. I mean, I think that there was enough information, and based on, personal reading I've done, there was enough information to say that there could have been earlier intervention.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think that he's dealing more with the collective. I think he's speaking more to the victims than the, let's say, bystanders, right, or anyone who had the potential to act. But it's a good question. It's a great question.
Well, they had no skin in the game, the people that didn't act.
That's right.
Very simple.
Right.
Wasn't meaningful to them. That's what this world is.
So instead of a God who, well, either is dead, right, to use Richard Rubenstein's language, or a God who hides God's face, what is it that David Weiss Halivni is saying here? What does God do? How does God interact with the world? How is it that the Holocaust was able to happen?
I think he comes close to my philosophy. He doesn't interact with the world. He made a conscious, godlike decision 6,000 or 7,000 years ago to no longer interact with the world. He created us in his image. We are capable of doing the good he is doing. And when we do, Messiah will come. Heaven on earth will exist.
So how I look at this, Angie,
Yeah.
is that you're saying that God removed your theory is God removed himself. He's now looking, or he or she, it is
Right.
looking down on us and like we were in a fishbowl and going, should have listened to me.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
No, he didn't say should have listened to me. He says they're not listening to me. He didn't say anything to us. He said it to himself. We didn't come up to his expectations, and perhaps he blames himself for it. And he says, someday, since we have the ability to tell good from evil, we will tell good. And we will make heaven for ourselves and therefore deserve it.
Sue, I want to hear how that lands with you. And then I saw Marcia and Merle and Deborah, and then to Steve.
I
yeah.
still feel that my personal view of God is an individual thing, and all of us look at this individually. But I also think that what I'm hearing is that if God had these expectations, and that the image of God is looking on us over all these millennials of years and laughing at us, that image of God has not come back to intervene, which speaks to Andy's notion of the Messiah. And I think more realistically, what Carol said about people being good and evil resonates with me.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to add that if my theory is correct, it's an interesting philosophy that we can sit here and discuss, but I think I have to finish with a final question. If it's true, what should we do? All of us here at the table, what is our responsibility? When we meet Friday night or Saturday morning and we pray and we read Torah, what is our purpose in doing that?
Mm-hmm. And so that's a fabulous next question that maybe we're not ready for quite yet, but I think it's an important personal question that we get to, right? Which is to say, how does our understanding of God affect the way we live our lives? Right?
Tikkun olam is the key thing, I think. That is the pathway to making paradise on earth. And if we don't do our part, then the evil will continue. And we will have something like the Holocaust again, maybe worse. Every time a very evil event occurs, mankind assumes it's the worst that will ever be. No, it's just the worst it's ever been. And there's no guarantee we won't have something worse than the Shoah again in the future if we personally don't do something about it.
So hold on one second. I want to keep us moving. I want to add an image because we're talking about what is the image of God here, right? What not as we're made in the image of God, but how do we understand God maybe in the way that David Weiss Halivni does, which is right to say, I heard, they should have listened to me, or they aren't listening to me, or laughing, right? Even there's an image that God could be crying, right? Is God crying with us? Are we crying with God? Right? There even could be, even with a God who stands apart, a sort of parallelism that might be meaningful to say that even though God could not do anything about, right, to stop the Holocaust, it does not mean that God is okay with it, right? God is so deeply hurt by it in the way that we are so deeply hurt by it. I wanna just sort of leave that there for now. And I wanna go to Marcia, and then Merle and Deborah, and then Steve, and we'll see what else we have time for. Marcia, please.
It's a little bizarre thought, but I'll share it. So there are a lot of things that happen in addition to wars and the Holocaust we consider atrocities, like tsunamis where a lot of people die and all of these other natural disasters. So is it possible that there is a God that believes that the world can only tolerate so many people, and every once in a while he tries to make it so that there are fewer people on Earth?
That's the Malthusian theory.
That's the what?
You ever studied Malthus in high school?
I haven't either.
That's a digression, but that theory is well known.
So, Marcia, it's interesting. It's certainly interesting. It would take us down some very, very difficult, right? Very, very difficult, challenging theological questions to say that, right, we had lost some sort of divine lottery, or that people who die in terrible world catastrophes are so that we can thin out the population a little bit. And I'm not sure it would pass the test, right? Gitz-Greenberg's test of something that could be said in the presence of dying children. But it's very, very interesting. Thank you, Marcia.
Yeah.
Merle and Deborah.
Yeah, from what you said, Marcia, that made me think about some of maybe my darker thoughts with COVID and plagues. Like, why do plagues happen? And is this, or at least evolutionarily speaking, for the whole species to survive? Are there times where you have something like that? But that's my own. I wanted to make two comments. One, getting back to is God, did God turn God's face away? Or so I may not have the historical sequence correct, but I thought there were times in the Torah, with both the flood and Sodom and Gomorrah, where there was some kind of understanding that there'd be no more, I hate to use the phrase because it's very loaded right now, but collective punishment. So that was not going to be an option to try and solve this problem of the Holocaust, although that was probably part of the problem. But this, I hate to refer to this with something as dark as the Holocaust, but God turning God's face away made me think of this book called Free Range Kids, where you let, like, people have to make mistakes to learn. And I think that's one of the points in this writing, was that the idea that for people to really find and express their full capacity for goodness, there was no way without being confronted with something that was its most unthinkable or horrendous. I'm not saying I think that's right or I agree with that. It's just, it's just something that I'm thinking about. So, did you have anything you want to say?
For me, it's very complicated, and it's also very simple. And I've really thank you for allowing me to participate in this remarkable forum. So lots of things have been said which trigger thoughts for me, but I think the one that resonates with me very powerfully is that the discussion about light, and always looking for a moment of light, or, within a Midsummer Night's Dream, the play within a play, a chink of light between Pyramus and Thisbe. I've always loved that metaphor, looking for a chink of light in any moment of darkness. And maybe that's just how am I going to get up? how am I going to go out and I don't want to go down to the bomb shelter again. I'm tired. I just want to stay where I am. Or the obligation you have to, because you have to step forward because you may be needed. So for me, my faith is about self-accountability. How do I choose to interpret moments of light? Is it because I'm looking for joy, or is it just because I'm looking to be able to breathe another moment in the circumstances? I think it changes a lot. And in some way, for me, it's really sort of condensed into the chores that we're tasked between in the journey of Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippurim. You know, we start with the light and the hope, and then we're asked to hold ourselves accountable. We're asked to request forgiveness from those around us. I mean, I do it to my Notrim, my Goy friends all the time, and they have no idea what I'm talking about, because I always say to them, you know, if I've done anything to offend you, please forgive me. They have no idea what I'm talking about. And I say, well, I have to ask you this because I have to feel comfortable with myself. And as for evil, and as for who's responsible, it's there. It's simply there. And I don't forgive it. I don't allow for it. I just recognize that it's there. And the only way that I can try to make sense of it is to look for that chink of light, really. So I guess that's that's my idea of God. It's the chink of light and free choice. So look for it.
Very, very powerful. Thank you. Very, very powerful. I hope you'll join us next time as well, where we'll look a little bit more about and think about that light, right? That light in the darkness. Thank you. Steve.
Now, mine is pretty much summed up, but I do want to say that during the Second World War, Rabbi Stephen Weiss had an heir of Roosevelt, and there were demonstrations at Madison Square Garden and all throughout the Jewish communities trying to get some action done. But you could say, and this is a really thing I never thought of until I was here, is that the Allies won the war. So if the Germans had won the war, it could have been altogether different for all of us. And I think that one of the things that I have difficulty with is I have difficulty seeing, well, the idea of evil and free choice. I mean, I think people should choose to be good. But there were some Germans who actually can dream. And there was a book, I think, No Broken Pieces or something to that effect, that talks about people who were in Germany and said, gee, wouldn't it have been great if we had won the war? And ordinary German people did some atrocious things. The German soldiers had people who couldn't do some of the things that were being done. So there was goodness in some people, but maybe Judaism is becoming more like a culture rather than going from religion, that we're Jewish because we were brought up Jewish and we believe in Jewish things. But the idea of thinking about God intervening in events maybe shouldn't be something that we really expect. We really have to, as I think some people have said here, to try to lead a good life and try to be good to people and try to make a better world. Whether there is a God or not a God, I think that's something we should try to stress. So I don't know.
Beautiful, Steve. Thank you.
I also want to state that and I asked Lino afterwards, we help refugee families here. And I'm wondering if these refugee families, once they've been helped by Jewish organizations, now have a different impression about what Jewish people are. And he was saying, yes, that they do. And I think that's wonderful. There's a big stereotype. A lot of people who you thought you were your neighbors probably don't feel as good about you as you thought they felt, even though we've interacted with them our whole lives. I mean, I worry. I mean, I worry about what's going on that high note.
Well, I think that on that ambivalent note, which is really where David Weiss Halivni is, right? And where I think we all are, right? like we said, like we joked about, we're not answering questions today. I think that where I'm seeing some real beauty, well, first of all, is in this incredible dialogue that we've been able to have over the last hour and 15 minutes. And in hearing for individuals where it is, right, whether it's influenced by the Shoah, by the Holocaust or not, hearing from individuals where we find God, right? Where does our own theology land? And we're not all there. And it's right. Just in last week's Torah portion, we read about Jacob who wrestled with God, is called Yisrael. Right? We are Yisrael. We are Israel. We are a people who wrestle with God our entire lives, and we never stand still in our own understanding of what it means.
Including here in this room.
Especially here in this room.
Did Jacob of Israel say that if God does this, that, and the other thing for me, you will be my God?
Right. He has a pretty basic notion of God there, right? That's actually before, yeah.
He doesn't wrestle with God, he bargains with God.
Right. Well, maybe that's why God came to wrestle. I don't know. But I'm struck by one thing in the commentary, and this is how we'll end. It's on like the next page after, and I'll put it back up for folks online. In the commentary, it's just this top left. I just want to read a little piece that I highlighted while I was reading it. It's the second line. He just says, by contrast, Halivni insists that the best and the right thing to do is to remain with our uncomfortable lack of good explanations, rather than try falsely to resolve our anxiety by explanations that are ultimately insufficient and harmful. That sometimes in trying to reconcile and harmonize and understand, we actually sometimes do more harm than good. Sometimes we do have to really sit with discomfort and with ickiness and with, right, even if it fits for us to say that God stands back and allows whatever is going to happen in the world to happen, that there's a discomfort in that too, right? If there was one answer to this question, we wouldn't be having a 4-part class or millions of books and millions of lectures on what the answer might be. So there is discomfort and ambivalence in bringing up the question in the first place. And I am just so very grateful to this group for our sitting with the question and wrestling with it together. So thank you very, very much. We'll meet again on January 7th and then January 21st.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Rabbi.
Thanks to our folks online. Really, really powerful.